Our next speaker is actually our spokesperson for Freethought, Arizona. He's sort of a silver-tongued devil who is very active in writing guest opinions. He's published 35 of them, and many of them he's received a lot of comments back, both very threatening in some cases and some right on. So he's made an impact, and I think we have, received some other people to come to Freethought, Arizona due to his intelligent guest opinions. He's primarily writing about the intersection of the politics and religion and how those two are creating a problem for us today, especially here in Arizona and throughout the United States for that matter. He is a secular, believes that we should be actually out there in front of people and letting people know that there is a secular community out here who needs to be represented, needs to be heard from, and he is the person that's been doing a lot of that. And I'm sure he's wanting us to do more as well, and we should, because I think we need to let people know, just like Diane was saying earlier, we need to be out there in front and to let people know we don't eat babies and we do other good things in the community. As a matter of fact, one of the things I do want to do more of is outreach programs. And we have someone who's going to start ramrodding that program in our audience here today is Patty. Patty, you want to stand up? And if anybody wants to volunteer, she's the one you want to see. We want to do things like maybe work at the food bank, do other things. I'm sure you would have good creative ideas out there. We'd like to get us out in the community so people realize that we are people who are interested in furthering people's good rights and freedoms too. Our speaker today will be Gil, and he's basically has a Bachelor of Science, a Bachelor of BA and an MA. He's a graduate from the California College of Podiatric Medicine and finished podiatric surgery residency in Chicago. He's board certified here in town for 30 years. There's been no lawsuits or anything pending against him. You can look it up. He's basically on our board and very active in our board. He's also on the Secular Coalition for Arizona board. And he has, actually I use this each time, but he basically has saved more souls than the Pope. And so his talk today is going to be Faith, the Greatest Impostor. Let's give it up for Dr. Gil Shapiro.
You actually looked up that I don't have any lawsuits against me? I don't, but it's 32 years now, so I've dodged many bullets now. Welcome. Between Richard's lecture before and my presentation now, this is like being in lecture hall at the U of A. I mean, you have your first class and now the second class. But this presentation this morning, I'm doing it without the PowerPoint. It's one of those things that I think we'll go over a little bit better. Sometimes when my wife gets upset with me when I don't listen to her, she says, Gil, right here. So I'm telling you, right here. I'm going to go for about 45 minutes or so, give or take a little bit, and then hopefully we'll be able to have a nice little Q&A after. My presentation is it's really a nice segue between what Richard was talking about earlier and what I have to talk about. You'll see the connection. For many, my talk will confirm what you have always felt or suspected about faith, and therefore it will be reassuring. For others, it will challenge current beliefs, and will certainly be provocative, and that's what it's intended to be. And by necessity, it's going to be a bit of an academic type lecture because it's important stuff that has to be done in a certain way. I've got to connect the dots, and I'm going to be using my notes here so that I don't skip by some things, because if I don't do it in a certain way, it's not going to make as much sense as it should make. This talk is also not meant to be all-inclusive on the subject. There's a lot of different areas that can be discussed that are sidelights of this, but I think you're going to get a good feel for what I'm trying to get across. One of the unfortunate things is right about now, at 10:40 on a Sunday, the people who should really be listening to Richard and me are not here. They're exactly in the wrong venue. You don't have to take any notes. At my email address, which I will put right over here when I'm done, I can send you a copy of the text that I'm working from. Just email me and I'll get it to you.
We can put it on the web.
And you put it on the web, okay. All right. And a big thank you to Jason Obenshine, who has given me some good information that isn't going to enhance this presentation. I do thank you very much. Also, if the room's too hot, too cold, let me know. If you can't hear me, if there's feedback, let me know. The question, the title of the presentation is Faith, the Greatest Impostor. That word impostor, I kind of hijacked from Sam Harris. In his book, The End of Faith, he's describing his animosity towards faith, and he described it as an impostor. And that resonated with me, and the more that I delved into the subject matter in preparation for this talk, I said it's not only an impostor, it is the greatest impostor, and I'll try to make that case. But the question that is most basic to most human beings is, what is it all about? Who said the hokey pokey? It's not the hokey pokey. As Richard was pointing out, these are profound questions. Why does the universe exist? Why do I exist? Have you ever thought of the odds of your existing? Imagine that your parents, first of all, had to meet, and the odds against them meeting is quite large. And then somewhere during their marriage, hopefully, on a romantic or alcohol-fueled evening, a little nookie took place, and one of your father's sperm emits, on a good night, 300 million, fertilized your mother's egg, and you started to come into existence. If that particular sperm had not done that, and another one did, you wouldn't be you. You know who you'd be? Your brother or your sister. And if you were to hold hands with your father and your mother, and they held hands with their father and mother, going back almost an infinite regress to, one could argue, the beginning of time, and now work to the present time, everything had to work out in an extremely specific way. 1 out of 300 million sperm, 1 out of 300 million sperm, 1 out of 3. For you to be here right now. These are questions I know at 3 in the morning can stop me in my tracks. They've also caused people to hit the horn at Speedway and Country Club when I'm thinking about this, and I say, let's get going. Other questions. Is there meaning and purpose in life? Does my life matter? Is everything material? Is it just matter and energy? Do we have a non-material essence, a soul? Is spirituality a real thing? Or is it just heightened human awareness? Is there a supernatural realm? And how would we find out about that? How would we communicate with the supernatural realm? How would you do that? As Richard was pointing out, what is consciousness? And ultimately, why is there something rather than nothing? And why is this something exactly the way it is and not something else? I've always wondered, if there were no observers like us in the universe, what would be the point of the universe? Imagine a universe with 0 observers of it. Just existence of rocks, stars. You know, what happens after we die? Is there an afterlife, a heaven or hell? If non-existence, and Richard was pointing this out, if non-existence was not an issue prior to our birth, why is it such a big deal now that we've existed? Psychologists tell us it's extremely difficult to conceive of your own non-existence. It's another thing to keep you up. And, you know, those are just general questions. Then there are questions that are specifically related to divinity. Is there a God? If so, is my God the right one? How would I know? What happens if I'm wrong? Why does God seem to be so indifferent and powerless or silent when he's needed most? Christopher Hitchens talks about the fact that human beings have been around in their somewhat present form for about 100, 200,000 years. And during that time, man has suffered terribly. Think of childbirth, think of the maternal deaths, think of infection, think of people not living past their 20s. Somewhere 2,000 years ago, God said, I've had enough. I'm coming back. I'm coming down. And I'm going to pick on Christianity now. It's such low-hanging fruit for me. But, you know, Jesus came 2,000 years ago to save the world. He didn't come to the entire world. He came to this small little area in the Middle East, but supposedly to save the world. And people who are faith-based thinkers think, well, now the world should have been saved. Well, did it? 1348 to 1350, we had the bubonic plague in Europe. Knocked out about half of Europe. Fast forwarding to the Spanish flu in 1918, 20 to 50 million people died, many in the prime of their life. It was a flu that attacked people in their 20s. 500 million were infected. 27% of the world's population was affected by the Spanish flu. And before that, I mean, we could talk about all the religious wars in Europe, and our Civil War, where 600,000 people died, and World War I, where 37 million people died, and World War II, and the Holocaust, 70 million, on and on and on and on. And this is during a time where this God that came to earth was supposed to help us out. So you can see where people start thinking about this and saying, what is going on here? We mourn terribly the shooting in Connecticut. 20 beautiful kids, 6 educators slaughtered. Terrible. But we also have to understand that 25 to 30,000 children die every day from treatable illness. 25 to 30,000 die every day. So when we're considering this faith-based concept of a God, a loving God, especially a God who loves children, we have to put that into the mix. You know, we start to wonder, why was anesthesia and surgery it's only 100 years old. I mean, if you had appendicitis 150 years ago, you died. If you broke your femur 150 years ago, how would it be treated? How would any infection be treated? Antibiotics are just here since 1945. So these are the questions that we have with us on a daily basis, and we say, you know, wouldn't it be a nice thing if we had a certain mechanism to find the answers out to these questions? I'm not talking the questions about how to build a house and how to cook a meal. I'm talking about questions that are always considered to be unknowable, incomprehensible, the meaning and purpose questions and all that. It really would be nice to have a mechanism, a way, an avenue, a pathway to find out the answers to these profound questions that we all deal with at some level and at some time. It leads to a bigger issue, and that is that famous line of, how do we know what we know, and how do we know what we don't know? Fair enough. Well, the subject of this lecture is that faith, for many people, probably the majority of the people on this planet, is the answer. If you have faith, you will get the answers, not to how to build a bridge or how to build, but to these unknowable questions, these incomprehensible questions that faith says, no, we can know them by this method. Faith-based thinkers claim with absolute certainty that they have knowledge of the unknowable and comprehension of the incomprehensible. Faith has a specific sphere of influence, which is its domain. But the purpose of this presentation is to tell you that people who think like that are delusional. And to throw out a definition here, we're going to be talking about definitions so we know what we're talking about. It's important to know the difference between delusional and denial. Delusional is when you believe things that are not true. Denial is when you don't believe things that are true. All right? Delusion is believing what is not true. Denial is not believing what is true. So I'm saying that faith-based thinkers are delusional because they're believing what is not true, and I hope to make the case. One of the, not an aphorism, but one of the things that we want to understand here is, and it's kind of a profound grasp of the obvious, but as we will go on, we'll know that only the knowable can be known and only the comprehensible can be comprehended. One of the questions that comes up is, are things that are considered unknowable really unknowable, or we just not know them yet? My point is that faith assumes a certain validity and a certain reliability in giving us the answers that we need. And again, with definitions, validity is if a faith claim provides the knowledge that it claims it's going to give you, and reliability is if that faith claim is reproducible. So when faith says that I am a valid and reliable way of giving you information, it would get our attention, for example, if all Catholics, for example, absent all other explanations, never got sick, never had accidents, lived a truly charmed life, that would get our attention. But no one faith group, as we observe, does this occur. We can say the Seventh-day Adventists live very long lives, they're very happy people, but it's just habits that they have. So I'm going to try to provide strong evidence that faith is not what it claims to be. And because faith fools and deceives and doesn't deliver what it promises, I think the title of The Greatest Impostor will be sound. So, if our society were to bestow an award for the most misunderstood, misinterpreted, and misapplied word, I think faith would be in contention for a gold medal. The word implies a virtuous aura, doesn't it? He's a man of deep faith. You know how they talk about politicians? He's a man of faith. He's a man of deep faith. To me, that's yellow flag, red flag. This is a faith-based institution. At its core, faith-based thinking, and I'm going to kind of conflate the words faith-based thinkers, believers, theists. I might use them together. It implies that this particular person has a unique pathway other than through logic, reason, and rational processes, a pathway that requires no further investigation. So when a faith-based thinker says, I know this because of revelation, conversation stops. You can't question that. And it's ironic that a person of deep faith's willingness to deny reality has become such a measure of his virtue in our society. How does delusion and self-deception of believing the impossible, or in the case of the clergy, deceiving others, become a good thing? How did that happen? Consider how we refer to people in the world. People out there, we talk about Mr., Mrs., Doctor, Professor, sometimes Your Honor. But think about how we refer to people who are professionals in the business of faith. We have a priest who we call Reverend. We have a bishop who we call Your Excellency. We have an archbishop we call Your Grace. We call a cardinal Your Eminence. And we call the Pope Your Holiness. These titles imply some kind of glorious human attainment that we mortal men will never have. So I guess my goal is to make the case that faith should be discredited and an outmoded concept that has no place in the 21st century. That's a big task, trust me. But I don't want to be like a party pooper. I don't want to be a wet blanket and say, no, people shouldn't have hope, we shouldn't have desire, we shouldn't be wishful thinkers at times. My talk about faith is in a very confined manner. Is it an appropriate avenue for knowledge? I want to touch on briefly some ways that faith is used in our common everyday experience that you might not realize these decisions we make have to do with whether we're faith-based thinkers. So the first one is, imagine if 2 weeks ago a friend or a relative said, I'm coming into Tucson Sunday night, the 20th. I'll be there at 6 o'clock. Pick me up at the airport. By a show of hands, how many of you would get in your car and get to the airport at 6 o'clock and pick them up without any further analysis of the issue? Okay. If you said you would just get in your car, you are a person of faith. Because a person could miss their flight, their plans could change, it could be mechanical problems with the plane. They, for a number of reasons, you could get there and they not show up. When I have to pick somebody up at the airport, they say they're coming in at 6 o'clock, I got online, flight status, I want to see the flights are there, I want to make sure there was enough time if there's a connecting flight that the person, made the connection. And then because of trust in the airline, and trust that this information I have is right, I go to the airport to pick the person up. So this is an example where in our daily lives, we deal with faith as opposed to trust. There's another way that we deal with faith, which is kind of cultural, and that is a lottery. About 6 years ago, I wrote a guest opinion because our Attorney General at the time, Grant Wood, was lamenting in the paper about how all the wrong people are playing the lottery. And I read it and I said, yeah, you're right. But you got to show these people what the odds are against winning. You can't just say it's 50 million to 1. People don't, there's a certain time where there's certain numbers, it just doesn't make sense anymore. So I wrote this guest opinion, I got some good play. And here's the essence of it, and I'll bring it to the current lottery. This past lottery was the Powerball, and the grand prize was $650 million. I'm always impressed with people who don't play it when it's 20 million, but 650 million, that's going to make a change in my life. So, what were the odds against winning the Powerball lottery? It's 175 million to 1. You take the numbers up to 50, 60, and then I think it's called factorial 50, something like that. You go, okay, so it's 50 times 49 times 48. Those are the odds against winning. 175 million to 1. People are so faith-driven that they say, you know what, this is my time, I'm going to win. Some people play $2, $5, now it's $2 a ticket. Some people take out $100, some people $1,000. So I'm going to show you what 175 million to 1 is. This is a very rational, reasoned way of showing it. And I want you to see how it conflicts with a faith-based mindset of, it's my time, I'm going to be the winner. Just down the block is Arizona Stadium, 50,000 seats. If someone put the winning ticket under one of those seats, and you walked into Arizona Stadium and you looked all around, and the person said, give me $2, you got one shot, pick the seat. How many of you would do that? Whether it's 10 million, 100 million, a billion. 175 million to 1 are 3,500 stadiums. So when you pay your $2 for this Powerball lottery, you would have to pick the right stadium out of 3,500. And if you did, on the same $2, pick the right seat in that stadium, the odds are daunting. What person in their right mind would do that? Faith-based people do this because they're not thinking straight. They don't have that. Everyone's saying, shit, I paid for it. Not paid. So, faith-based thinking occurs in things like the lottery. Faith-based thinking occurs how we see ourselves in the universe. Faith-based thinking says we are a top-down creation. God created us somewhere about 10,000 years ago. Reasonable people, people of reason, think we're bottom-up creation, evolution. We also have a way of thinking, let me get that last one here, about faith-based thinking as it affects human rights, public policy. The issue of gay rights comes up. Faith-based thinkers align public policy and voting with what their faith tells them. So, for example, their faith tells them that homosexuality is a choice. It's a bad choice. It's not something that is natural, they say. God doesn't like it that way. And they deny people their rights. Research says just the opposite. Research says, you know what? It's starting to become clear that being gay is genetic. There's some environmental factors for sure. In some very small instances, it is choice. But overall, it's your nature. And here's how faith-based thinking impacts on a whole group of people. About 3 to 7% of the population just happens to be gay. And people who stand by faith-based thinking are actually influencing public policy. So this is something that really does have some import. We're going to need to define some terms, because only unless we have some real clarity as to what we're talking about are we going to know where we're going here. So the most important thing I can define right now is reason and faith. And reason, can you hear me when I'm talking right here? Okay. Reason is that human faculty that identifies and integrates logically and coherently the information that is presented to us. I'll say it again. Reason is that human faculty that identifies and integrates logically and coherently the information that's presented to us. I don't think anything could be a finer example of reason than the scientific method. Richard was alluding to it before. You have an observation, you have a hypothesis as to why that observation occurred, and then you go through a testing process. What does that testing process involve? It involves making predictions about, well, if my hypothesis is right, then this and this should happen. It also has to do with reproducibility. Am I getting the same results here in the United States as they're getting in China, in India, in South America, on the moon, if it was there? Has this hypothesis been falsified? Meaning scientists love nothing more than to take someone else's idea and try to show him that he's wrong. It's a cottage industry among scientists. So, observation, hypothesis, testing, prediction, reproducibility, falsifiability. And if you can't falsify it, and you can reproduce it, and you can make predictions that hold, then we come up with a conclusion. But even that conclusion is tentative, it's provisional, something new could come down the pike, but we go with it. That's the scientific method. That's a good example of reason. Now, faith. This is the crux. Faith can be described different ways, but for our purposes as a juxtaposition against reason, faith is an unquestioning belief of ideas in the absence of evidence or despite evidence to the contrary. So, for example, religious dogma, revelation, miracles, prayer. Faith is emotional. Get into a discussion with someone about faith. You'll find that they have a very emotional attachment to their beliefs. People get worked up about it. Think of that bumper sticker. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. But you out there, as critical thinkers, you are committed to reason because you're committed to rationality. And I'm just going to read a little part here because this is important. It means that the critical thinker is committed to the never-ending process of correcting errors in knowledge based solely on the criteria of reality. Reason people, you always are finding little errors and things, you're trying to correct them. Adds to our knowledge. The critical thinker holds the conviction that man's mind is fully competent to know the facts of reality. No aspect is closed to rational scrutiny. If you have something that's unknowable, it's unknowable. If it's incomprehensible, it's incomprehensible. The critical thinker does not accept any doctrine or anything on faith because faith is not critical thinking. Again, it is neither a valid nor reliable way of knowing. So, if reason is asserted to be the only pathway to knowledge, then faith is just excluded from consideration as a pathway to knowledge. Man should have no use of faith. This is a bold claim, because if God belief, for example, is faith-based, then God belief cannot be accepted as rational. But, the big but, the believer or the faith-based thinker, he contends that faith transcends reason. It does have a sphere of influence to have access to what we consider the unknowable and the incomprehensible. It has the key to unlock that door. Faith, the believer says, provides answers to the ultimate questions, knowledge of the unknowable and comprehension of the incomprehensible. It's quite a claim that faith-based thinkers have. But remember, faith-based thinkers are not offering knowledge that builds bridges and makes planes fly. They have a very specific sphere of influence. So I'm going to discredit that claim right now. But we got to make some definitions here. What's a belief? I'll give you a couple of seconds. Think of what is a belief. It's a mental acceptance of something as true, even though absolute certainty may be absent. An acceptance of something that's true, even though absolute certainty is absent. In common usage, I might say, well, I believe the Wildcats are going to be tops in their division this year. I believe we all can work together. These are honest beliefs. But in religious jargon, listen to this belief, and it's a belief that most faith-based thinkers have. I believe my Bible is the inerrant, meaning without error, infallible, it can't be wrong, and literal, actual Word of God. That's quite a belief. It's always interesting when they say, I believe this, as opposed to saying, I know this. In that sense, they're a little honest there. Okay, what's a fact? What is a fact? A fact, interestingly, is something that has really occurred or something that is really the case. Like today is Sunday. It's really the case. Today is Sunday here in Tucson. How do I know that? Well, I can verify it. Or I can say to you, try to falsify it. Try your best to prove to me, everybody here, that today is not Sunday. That's a fact. Which leads us to a definition of the word knowledge. What is knowledge? Well, putting those things together, knowledge is the ability to use facts to accurately identify reality. Knowledge is the ability to use those facts to accurately identify reality. This means an explanation which so far has survived our best criticisms. So when you have knowledge, it's been something that's been criticized left and right. It's withstood those criticisms. There are no errors in it. It rises to the level of knowledge. One of the important points in this presentation is that to know something is much more valuable than to just believe something. Don't get so hung up when people say, I believe. No, it's I know. Much better. And the word science is going to be thrown around a lot. Science has two definitions. One is it's a body of knowledge. The second definition of science is it is a process to get that knowledge. So it's a body of knowledge and then the process to get it, like the scientific method. And the last one we're going to define right now brings it all together, and that is reality. Think for a second how you would define reality. Reality is the state of things as they actually exist, rather than as they may appear or might be imagined. In a wider definition, reality includes everything that is and has been, whether or not it is directly or intimately observable. Think along the lines of subatomic particles, neutrinos. Think along the lines of massive things, black holes. Reality is also, even if you can't comprehend it, like quantum mechanics, very counterintuitive, things popping in and out of existence, things where you can measure them, but if you do measure them, they don't exist in that spot anymore. Very counterintuitive. A still more broad definition includes everything that has existed, exists, or will exist. Okay. It's my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions who think like I and you do, that faith-based thinkers have to get their heads around this. The presence of an idea or belief in one's consciousness does not constitute knowledge. So, as Richard was pointing out in his presentation, just because you have this belief in whatever religion, that doesn't mean that that has risen to the level of knowledge. It's just a belief. Knowledge requires surviving our best criticisms. We can certainly have false beliefs. The earth is flat, astrology is credible. These people have these beliefs. So it's much better to say, I believe it's not as good to say, I believe it's a fact, as opposed to saying, I know it's a fact. And if man is to acquire knowledge, this correct identification of reality, he's got to have a method to do it. This is what I talked about before. That corresponds to reality, that to distinguish beliefs that correspond to reality and from those which do not. So, how do we do this? Well, we take the belief and we say, if that belief is justified, then it rises to the level of knowledge. And we have to define a little bit what justified means. And this is all for you to, when you deal with friends and family who, you get into these religious arguments or arguments about faith. These are things that you can pull out right now and use. There are 3 minimum requirements that all must be fulfilled before a belief can claim the status of knowledge. And I'm going to use evolution and creationism a little bit for comparison purposes. Number 1, a belief must be based on rational evidence. It must explain the available evidence or facts better than the competing explanations. Because we have a lot of explanations for things. You want something that is the best explanation. Watch what happens with creationism. God said he did it, therefore he did it. It's as simple as that for faith-based thinkers. But remember, if a person is making a positive claim, they have to be able to provide the evidence for it. Evolution. We have carbon dating, radiometric dating, we have the fossil record. We have everything we need. If you get into an argument with a creationist, here's an approach that you might want to use. Ask them, if God and the Bible were not in play, what would be your criticisms of evolution? It'll stop them in their tracks. A belief must be internally consistent, not self-contradictory. A very famous Russian biologist once said, without evolution, nothing in biology makes sense. And if you pursue that, you'll see that he's right. In creationism, talk about internally consistent, we can go back to Genesis. There are two Genesis stories of how the world came into being. There's a big problem in the order of how things came into being. You can't have this before you have that kind of thing. Noah's Ark. Really? Polar bears? Kangaroos? How did they get to the Middle East? There's no internal consistency starting right in the beginning of the Bible, and it just gets worse. The last thing about a justified belief. The first is rational evidence. Second, internally consistent. The third is that the belief cannot contradict previously validated knowledge. Meaning, knowledge is a kind of a building block. You build on it, you build on it, you build on it. You can't have something up here that all of a sudden goes against what has been established. And evolution is consistent with all past scientific discoveries. Creationism, obviously, is not. And they don't have any good explanations for those inconsistencies. Creationists will say, I see the same facts as you do, but I have a different interpretation. And they just are very smug about that. And you should look at them and say, oh, no, you don't. You don't have that ability to just willy-nilly have some interpretations. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So, and this is very important, because what I think you're getting the drift of is that unless a belief is very constrained over here, it has all these parameters, that it's not worth being in the case, reaching the level of knowledge. But not every I has to be dotted, not every T has to be crossed for beliefs to have some import. So for example, you can believe something as knowledge provisionally based on all the current information we have. So for example, when there was a tsunami off the coast of Alaska about a month ago, there was an earthquake off the coast of Alaska. In Hawaii, they prepared for a tsunami, because that information that they got from that earthquake led them to believe in Hawaii that there very well could be could be a tsunami. So they cleared the beaches. Well, it never happened. But were those people in Hawaii wrong to believe that they could have been in trouble? No. They were taking information that they have and using it properly. So, how are faith and reason different? Huh? No, I'm just kidding. Faith's claim to fame is that man needs knowledge of ultimate truth. It needs to know how to get access to the unknowable and the incomprehensible. Reason cannot fill this, only faith can accomplish this. But the believer is now obligated to demonstrate that faith is capable of being a tool to acquire knowledge. And he can't. He can't because faith-based beliefs have no mechanism, as I said before, to separate justified from unjustified beliefs. If you're going to defend reason as the only way of knowing something, that's your best argument against faith. You don't have to get into an argument about the pitfalls of faith. All you have to say is, for what we can know, reason provides us with the only tool in the toolbox we need. So when you're talking to a person of faith, and they get you into a little bit of a discussion on this, you say to them, unless your faith can show it can separate fact from fiction and correct errors in your belief so as to form justified beliefs in the same way reason does, your faith cannot be considered a valid and reliable pathway to knowledge. Additionally, because faith-based people claim to have this key to the unknowable and the incomprehensible, you have to say to them, how do you have access to that? What is the way that you can unlock the door to the unknowable and incomprehensible, meaning and purpose in life, why we're here and all that. That will stop them in their tracks. So let's review a little bit about the pitfalls of why faith doesn't work. It's not based on rational evidence. If it were, it would be called reason or science. Faith has no way to self-check itself. It has no way to police itself. Ask a faith-based person, what's the mechanism in your belief system that would make you understand that your beliefs are wrong? I've asked someone that. He was giving a presentation on stage on creationism, which literally stopped him in his tracks. Richard, I think you were there with me that night. As Richard pointed out also in his presentation, the scientific method we talked about goes from observation, hypothesis, testing to conclusion. The faith-based method is conclusion and then observation. There is no, as Richard pointed out, hypothesis and testing because it's not necessary. The conclusion is God did it. The observation is nature, the universe. Okay. This is an interesting thing. This group that we had gone to over on Culp Road was doing a presentation on creationism. And the group is called the Arizona Origin Science Association. It's a fundamentalist Christian group in Tucson whose presentations I and some other people here have attended. They are a science organization. The purpose in what I'm about to tell you is to show you how misinterpreting these people are of what science is. This, I'm going to read to you verbatim their statement of beliefs. This is their, like, what is to the United States the Constitution. This is their Constitution as a scientific organization. 1, the universe and everything in it was created by God rather than by spontaneous generation and development from one kind to another. Sounds like a conclusion to me. Number 2, all creation was accomplished in 6 consecutive literal days, not over millions of years, and the earth is relatively young, thousands, not billions of years. This is a scientific organization. There is a divine design and purpose in nature as opposed to an unorganized, random, and chance development. Number 4, a worldwide historical flood caused by God occurred at the time of Noah. It was not just a local flood. Number 5, the Bible is the inspired, revealed word of God to man and is accurate in all areas. Number 6, Jesus Christ is God and is the only substitute and Savior through whom man is redeemed from sin. Imagine a group that considers itself a scientifically based group. This is what I meant, that either you're faith-based or you're reason-based. There is no connection between the two. The thing that gets me is the willful ignorance here. We have the University of Arizona, very acclaimed Department of Geosciences. Why don't these people take their presuppositions, these beliefs, make an appointment with the Department of Geosciences and sit down across a table and say, this is what we believe, show me where we're wrong. This is called willful ignorance. Willful ignorance is a very important term because it means the answers are out there. They just don't want to know. The answers would be very unpleasant to them. Another reason that faith doesn't work. What people trot out when they talk about faith is what's called a self-proclaimed authority. I'll give you a little synopsis of what that means. You're having a discussion with a faith-based thinker. He says, I have faith the Bible is correct because it's God's word. You say, how do you know it's God's word? He says, because God says so. You say, where does he say that? He says, in the Bible. You know, I'm not making this up. What's the name of that fallacy, by the way? Fallacy of circular reasoning, right. A faith-based belief system leaves no avenue for questioning or doubt. Faith beliefs are fixed and non-negotiable. Faith-based thinkers have an emotional attachment to certainty. I think it's a lazy and irresponsible way of thinking. You know, the more I delve into this, the more I'm getting angry. And as you should too, because it is so preposterous that faith-based thinking has risen to such a level of reverence in this country and in politics. Olivia, you must go crazy up there. That it guides public policy when I'm pointing out point by point why it should have no value. Ask a faith-based person, have you ever considered that your faith claim may be wrong? The answer is always no. The honesty in science, if you ask a scientist, have you ever thought that your scientific conclusion may be wrong? He said, of course I have. I'm just waiting for someone to show me. You know, for me, it's not so much the object of the faith-based commitment, such as the religion, that's unacceptable. What is offensive to me, and should be to you, is the degree of the commitment to the beliefs that are so unjustifiable and so demonstrably false. I mean, people dig in their heels on stuff that is so provably false. You know, my mother, I used to have these arguments with her all the time. I mean, it was getting tedious with her. But she was a very religious person. And sometimes when we'd get to a point where I had it was checkmate. Checkmate. You know, you hate to do that to your mother. But it was like, checkmate. She looked at me and said, Gil, sometimes things just don't have to make sense. I still think in those little moments that my name Gil was short for guilt. She knew where she was going with this kid. Faith-based thinkers, to them, their faith is irrevocable. You know, once you're in it, it's like you can't get out of it. Because a faith that's tentatively held is not really a faith at all. So when someone is a faith-based thinker, they drank the Kool-Aid, they've dived into the swimming pool, they have fully committed themselves. It's so nice to be a person of reason or science, because we just go along like, this is where the evidence is leading me. If the evidence leads me in another direction, hey, I'll go there. You're all just doing fine. The other thing, you know, with faith-based thinking is their assertions are just flat out wrong. The earth is not 10,000 years old. B'chayai. They're also wrong that they say there is a supernatural realm. Remember, faith-based thinking involves a supernatural. There's an assumption that there's a supernatural realm. There's never been any investigation that has shown that there is a supernatural realm. Supernatural. That means everything that's out there, you know, like Sagan said, the universe is everything that is, was, will be. They're saying there's something else that we haven't even discovered. And I am devoting my life to principles that emanate from this supernatural realm. Well, you know, back in biblical times, miracles were flying off the shelves. All of a sudden, we get to modern times where we can record things, we can watch things. There hasn't been a recording of a verification of a miracle ever. Ever. Think of all the times where a miracle could have happened. You know, when Sully Sullenberger lost his engines over the Bronx and was coming down into the Hudson, wouldn't that have been a wonderful time for God to take his plane and just bring it right back to LaGuardia? He didn't do that. Think of all the times where, the sad situation, a parent is going to back over her child in her SUV, she can't see it. Wouldn't that be a wonderful time for a miracle to... There are millions of events every day where bad things happen to good religious people, where a miracle would be expected. There has never been one. Why doesn't that get their attention? I don't know. The other thing is that, for example, faith-based thinkers say, well, they get to the moral question. how can you have morality without a faith? And Christopher Hitchens had a great comeback to that. He said to the faithful, he said, okay, I'll take you on. He said, tell me what moral statements or actions can be done or said by a believer that can't be done by a non-believer. And he died never having received a coherent answer to that. Faith-based people have a God that says he loves his creation, both man and animal. We talked about the man before, but think about the animal kingdom. Have you ever seen a wildebeest taken down by a pride of lions on film? It's not a pretty sight. A pack or a pride of lions will come up on it, this sentient creature that has feelings. And will either grab it around its neck or its leg and will pull it down. And while the animal is still alive, its limbs are being torn from its body. I mean, I don't mean to get gross. But you would think that at least animals that don't have original sin should be spared from that kind of cruelty. God could have arranged it that way. He didn't. Matter of fact, Christians have to say, well, God did create the food chain, didn't he? And in order to create the food chain, he had to give lions big fangs and claws to do what? To inflict cruelty on animals down the food chain. He gave snakes venom to kill, in sometimes the most unpleasant way, its creatures. God could have made all creatures vegetarians. You know, there are some common sense things where you look out on the world the way it is, and you say, okay, I'll accept your hypothesis, so to speak, but then explain to me this. And these are the kind of things that you can discuss. So what I'd like to do is kind of open it up to some questions and comments. There's more that I can say, but we're kind of running out of time, and I think I've made my point here. So.
Okay, let's give Gil a big hand and then entertain some questions. Come up here. Would like to have a question?
More couple statements. You talked about killing an animal. What's the difference between killing an animal and killing a plant? You got to eat either way. And you know, the animal rights people don't want you to kill something anyway, which wasn't true many centuries ago. Nobody cared about the animal whatsoever. And on some of your other statements about I've noticed that Christians say a surgeon's hands are guided by God or it would not be a successful operation. And where you mentioned the flood occurred on a flat earth, not a round one.
I don't know where to start.
It floods easier that way.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk today. I think it's one of the better ones in a while. But here comes the but. But I'm one of the guys that raised his hand, okay? I think I've gone to airports maybe 30, 40 times to pick up people, and they always showed up. So that's evidence that it is not faith-based, that it is that. So what's your...
A broken clock is right twice a day.
40 times?
You got very lucky.
Hi, Gil. I hear this from believers, religious believers, and people that call themselves agnostics and are trying to tell me that I shouldn't call myself an atheist. And that is that it takes as much faith to be an atheist as it does to be a believer. And the first thought that comes to my mind is to suggest that they go have sex with themselves. But is it true?
No. When someone is an atheist, we all start out as atheists, and it's during our childhood where we are, where religion is indoctrinated into us. One of the interesting things is, imagine if someone like Billy Graham was taken in childhood and brought to Iran. He probably would have been an Ayatollah, given his propensity for religion. It's very subjective, but atheists, you know, you can attack this in two ways. One is atheists are atheists because they've never been convinced, based on the evidence that religious people give them, that they should adopt a certain religion. Atheists, oftentimes, it's not that we have faith in science, because sometimes people conflate science as another type of religion, like scientism. But it's often that we have trust, and it's the difference between trust and faith. Like I showed you, trust is something where we believe in something, and it's always been that way. We trust the laws of physics. We trust the scientific method. We trust the power of reason. That's why I'm an atheist. So I would not go along with that particular way of thinking.
Hi, Gil. I enjoyed your talk. Besides religion and faith being used as mechanisms of social and political control, which seems, self-evident if you look at our own state legislator, for example, it also, I think, religion and faith also, for many people, act as a primary psychological buffer against the inevitability of our own mortality. So my question diverges a little bit into that realm. As a moral imperative, should we not, as atheists, be in the forefront of an immortalist movement that seeks to increase scientific research for the actual extension of the human lifespan? Thinkers such as Aubrey de Grey and Ray Kurzweil. I mean, there are, of course, a lot of social and political, ramifications to all of that. But since we, as atheists, know that when we're gone, would it not be logical for us to want to extend the natural lifespan, I mean, if not indefinitely, even another 10, 20, 50 years,
Absolutely.
A healthy lifespan?
And a healthy extension of life, too. Yeah.
Hi, Gil. Thanks for a good talk, but it must have been dozens of times when you used the phrase faith-based thinkers. It's an oxymoron.
Kind of an oxymoron, huh? So no.
You might want to say faith-based feelers, or, following Richard's thoughts, faith-based intuitors, or something of that nature, but they're not faith-based thinkers.
This presentation will be amended, so noted.
Thank you, sir.
So you mentioned miracles. Most of my family is religious, and most of my girlfriend's family is religious too. And Christians will tell you right away that there are miracles every day. Anytime somebody falls out of a building and survives, or their house burns down and no one died, they will call this a miracle, and they will testify to it in church. So how would you address this?
We have to understand, boy, I should have had the definition of the word miracle. A miracle, to make any sense, is a supernatural event, one that defies natural law. What you're describing are events that would be under the category when someone falls out of a house and is not killed and all that. This event is remarkable, it's awesome, it's quite unusual, stunning. It's all of these words, but it's not a miracle. You would have to explain how that person surviving defied natural law. You see what I'm getting? we tend to depreciate a lot of our vocabulary these days. I have fun talking about when I've gone through a drive-through and I'm getting a hamburger or something like that, and I give the gal there exact change, and she looks at me and goes, "Awesome." I've usually reserved that for a clear night in the middle of the desert when I'm looking at the Milky Way. So I think what I'm getting at is that it's a remarkable event. It does not rise to the level of a miracle. And like I said, there have been no miraculous events ever recorded.
I have a question. Right here. It seems to me that some of the arguments for and against faith-based thinking is, in part, a problem with language, because you used faith in certain ways that were that for the common person doesn't have two definitions. Faith that the airplane is going to arrive. Well, people have faith that that plane is going to arrive because there's been some empirical evidence of the plane continually arriving normally on time. Okay, it's trust, but you used it as faith. And then there's faith that's based upon nothing. So
when I use that example, I said when people go to the airport and just expect the person to be there, with all the things that could go on that would not make them there, they're exhibiting faith. Because there's nothing that they can hang their hat on, like, I trust that they'll be there. Really? How would you possibly have any trust that the person's going to be there? You don't know the mechanics of the plane, you don't know the weather, you don't know whether they're making an action. You're exhibiting pure faith.
well, you are exhibiting faith. However, if you have gone to the airport numerous times and the airplane has arrived generally on time and the people have been there, then you have some basis on that faith. Okay.
I'll grant you a little bit of that, but it's mostly you trust that things will be on time and all that.
And in terms of trust is somewhat based on faith.
I think trust is more based on the fact that things can be counted on to act in a certain way based on, for example, like the laws of nature. For example, if I take this clip and I do that, I have trust that when I let go, it's going to fall. I don't have faith. Because I have trust because every time I've done it and everyone else has done it on this planet, it's fallen. Yes, sir.
Do we have a tendency to think in terms of immortality and redemption? And is that the propensity that humans have as a way of surviving and passing on our rules? And can we equate the Christian or whomever tendency to do that toward a supernatural world? And should we equate the propensity for legacy, which is a sense of immortality because you're contributing to the human condition, as atheist? I mean, should we tend, rather than just declare our atheism as being our statement, the end, or should we go toward a cause and try to get redeeming value and immortality by affecting the human condition for the future?
Well, that's a loaded question. You know, we, as atheists and non-believers, even agnostics, we go where the evidence tells us. A lot of times, reality tells us things we don't want to hear. So, for example, when the question comes up, what happens after we die? The best that we can say is we don't know. Probably the right answer is you just don't exist anymore. This is very unpalatable to most people because we want to feel that, as Richard pointed out, our soul, our non-material self, somehow transcends our physical body and winds up somewhere. So, as non-believers, I'm not sure how we would approach that. I don't know. Jason, you're an astute thinker on this.
Well, in relation to the question of, you know, faith versus trust, one way to look at that is you have trust in things that you do not have a criticism of. Whereas if you have faith, you know a criticism of something that somebody's saying, but you believe it anyway. You believe it in the face of that criticism. That's faith. So when you talk about, well, what happens after you die? If you know, you say, well, you go to this magical realm and you sit around on clouds and play harps all day. And I mean, we have endless criticisms of that, endless reasons why that is not the case. There's no evidence for that to be the case. And then you say, well, okay, if I die, do I just cease to exist? What's the criticism of that, right? We have no criticism of that particular hypothesis. Now, maybe there's something else we haven't thought of yet, but you know, until we think of it, we got to go with the thing that we don't have a criticism for.
It's at least the default position.
Yes.
It's next. and I'll get-
In a faith-based system, faith might be immoral because it is a form of gambling that you are right.
It's a form of gambling that you are right.
Yeah, I just have one thought. When people talk about the soul going somewhere after we die, my question is, why did the soul get in the first place? Why did the soul get here in the first place?
Yeah, questions about the soul. It's a loaded point. Just one little point on what you're talking about. Remember, there are words in our vocabulary that are strictly religious words. Sin, soul, heaven. If you went to a South Sea island and you met the natives there and they said, welcome to our island. Our God is Bagubu, and we believe in Bababa, and we feel that our souls our Chamoras go to Gadabadab. You would think they're speaking gibberish because it doesn't make any sense. Don't get sucked into all of a sudden taking the word soul seriously. It is a religious term, really without any meaning. Well, it has a meaning, but there's no evidence that it really exists. Sin is something else. Oh, if you don't believe it, you're committing sin. No, that's in your world. That's in your world. So basically what I'm saying, Moshe, is don't get caught up in worrying about these religious terms. They're just out there. Every religion has its own terms. Let it go.
Yeah, but it's just illogical. Why to make the trip here and go back there? Just stay.
You know, Scientologists have this thing where we have aliens in us, and every religion has the crazy stuff.
You mentioned quite a few times questions that, is it not, questions that you ask the believers. But they ask you questions sometimes too. And I want to distinguish between the fanatic believers that most of us, we cannot reach them, they cannot reach us. There is a partition between us. And between other people that you might meet at work, they are your colleagues, and they are educated people, intelligent people, people who are willing to think, and they have some questions. Like one of the questions that they ask is, and you didn't touch this at all, one of the questions that they ask is, so how do you explain all this? And actually, we don't have an answer to this. But my answer is, when I don't have an answer, I think that it's very honest to say, I don't know, we don't know, or this is not knowable. We haven't found a way to know it yet. There is no sin in saying this.
And I say that quite often.
Right.
I agree with you 100%.
But when it seems that this is where we need, I go one step farther and I say, well, when I don't know, I say something honest. I say, I don't know. You don't know, so you put God there. And this is dishonest, because actually, we are saying the same thing. You call the I don't know equals God. And that's it. So the meaning of the word God in your world, in your universe, is I don't know.
If you define belief as the assertion that something is true in the absence of any proof, then when you start talking about justifiable beliefs, it seems to me to be a contradiction, and I'm wondering if the word belief is not applicable in that case, and you should say something like an expectation that something might happen. For example, the tsunami was, the people didn't, they used the word belief, but they did not in fact believe, according to the definition. They expected, or they thought that it might happen. They didn't believe. Believe, I think the word belief should be reserved to those who actually believe and assert that things are true in the absence of any proof, and that is irrational. So they're irrational.
You're conflating two things. One is faith is belief in ideas where there's no evidence for them or despite contradictory evidence. A belief is an idea that's held as true, even though there is no absolute proof that it is true. So I think you would maybe just confuse those two concepts.
I went strictly by the definition of belief. And can you say that a belief, can you ever say that a belief is justifiable?
Sure. The belief that the Earth goes around the sun.
That's not a belief.
No.
It was
as a belief, and then it rose to the level of knowledge.
Well, then it ceased to be a belief.
Yes, now
It ceased to be a belief at that point. So it's not a belief anymore.
it has achieved knowledge status.
Well, it was something that was believed at the time, but it changed. It did not become a belief then. So you can't say, I have justifiable true beliefs. That when they become true, they're not beliefs anymore. That was the point I was making.
Right. It becomes knowledge. All right. Okay.
Just one
I'll let you-
last question.
God is man's default for his own ignorance. All gods have been from the beginning of time.
There you go.
All right, another big, oh, I think we're done, right? Okay, another big hand for Gil.